Although the previous budget had cut one battleship from the Royal Navy's preferred schemes, this wasn't a complete disaster, as the three Bellerophon class could operate with the lone HMS Dreadnought to form an effective squadron of 4, which was the Royal Navy's baseline unit for battleships in a fleet. But with a naval arms control discussion going nowhere, it was clear that new dreadnoughts would still need to be built, and so the Royal Navy started to look at a follow-on design. In order to make the ships more powerful than their predecessors, there were two main options, as development of the 13.5-inch gun was not progressed far enough by 1906 to include it in considerations. These options were a longer-barreled 12-inch gun, the 12-inch 50 caliber, which should have greater shell velocity and therefore both a flatter ballistic arc at battle ranges and better penetration capability, or a triple turret to increase the number of guns which the ship carried. The latter was also quite attractive, as size and weight-wise it would be almost directly interchangeable with the projected weight and dimensions of the twin 13.5-inch. A series of designs were drawn up. One used the Invincible-style turret layout, with one turret at each end on the centerline and two en echelon amidships, but with the fore and aft turrets upgraded to triples. This gave a theoretical 10-gun broadside on at least narrow broadside arcs, and also used the new 12-inch 50 cal. Two other designs had only triple turrets. One of them had 3, with the third triple turret replacing the wing turrets but being moved to the centerline, giving a broadside of 9 guns, and the other had 4, with a layout roughly similar to that which would be adopted later on by the Italian Dante Alighieri and Russian Gangut classes. Armour and speed would be similar to the Bellerophons. The Admiralty favoured the first layout for having 7 guns capable of firing ahead, and the first triple turret design for offering a 9-gun broadside across quite wide arcs, as compared to the 8 guns offered by the first design once you got off of directly perpendicular. It also happened to save on weight. The 4 triple turret design was still in the running, but the size and cost involved to build such a ship at this point left it a distant third, as the government was increasingly growing penny pinching. The first Invincible-style layout won out the second round of considerations, with plans to build a total of 4, as after a tussle with the government on funding, a compromise of building 3 battleships in financial year 1907-8 and another in financial year 1908-9 had been agreed. Although maximum armour thickness hadn't changed from the Bellerophons, it was felt that the layout had been improved. But then a couple of admirals began to get cold feet over the triple turret, and the whole thing was overhauled rapidly to simply be yet another copy of Dreadnought and Bellerophon, somewhat enlarged due to the larger main battery guns, and thus delaying the triple turret's introduction into Royal Navy battleships until the early 1920s. The resulting design still retained 10 main battery guns, although of course they were 12-inch 50s instead of the earlier 12-inch 45s, and the larger hull also meant that the secondary battery, although remaining at 4-inch guns after a brief flotation with 5-inch guns, was now 20 units strong, with pairs of single guns mounted atop each turret except for X-turret, the first aft centerline mount, just behind the second funnel, with the rest of the small guns mounted singly in the superstructure. 3 underwater 18-inch torpedo tubes were also carried, 1 per side and 1 astern, with each having a pair of reloads. Belt armour was a maximum of 10 inches thick, with deck armour in several layers, with the thickest individual layer being 3 inches thick. Speed was the now standard 21 knots, courtesy of 24,500 shaft horsepower delivered via 4 screws, with the ships displacing 19,700 tons. As it turned out, only 3 of these vessels would be built: St Vincent, Collingwood and Vanguard, as the 4th ship, which was planned for the next year, was then redesigned in the interim into HMS Neptune. The 3 ships were laid down at the very end of 1907 and the start of 1908, launched between September 1908 and February 1909, and commissioned within a couple of months of each other, all in spring 1910. All 3 ships were then assigned to the Home Fleet, which would later become the Grand Fleet, and thus their careers were pretty similar to many British capital ships of this time period. By the time of Jutland, the sisters had been partially split. Collingwood and St Vincent were in the 5th Division of 1st Battle Squadron, while Vanguard was in the 4th Division of 4th Battle Squadron. Their positions were generally towards the rear of the fleet, and so they only saw limited action. Although St Vincent and Collingwood did later claim a few hits on German battle cruisers, with the future King George VI serving aboard Collingwood. Observers spotted a tumbling German main battery shell sail just over the turret he was in at one point. In July 1917, seemingly apropos of completely nothing, Vanguard exploded in Scapa Flow, with only 2 survivors. Although the evidence was now widely scattered across several square miles, it was eventually decided that, on the balance of what could be found and investigated, that the ship had probably been carrying old cordite well past its use-by date, and that some of this in the 4-inch magazine had ignited, with the blaze rapidly spreading to the amidship's main magazines, which had then destroyed the ship. The other 2 vessels survived the war, but as 12-inch armed ships they were seen as almost obsolete. St Vincent briefly became a gunnery training vessel in 1919 before being placed in reserve and then scrapped in 1921. Collingwood also went into reserve almost immediately, but had a slightly wider role as a training ship for gunners, radio operators, and then finally cadets, before she was sold for scrap in 1922.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.